Cliff, welcome to the Leanpub launch video for Stop Implementing AI, the no BS playbook for AI that works. I was wondering if you could take a moment to talk to us a little bit about who you are and where you're from and what you do and what your book is about and who it's for.
Golly, yeah. So I really appreciate being here. Thank you so much for taking the time. Um, as you said, Cliff Robbins, VP of Engineering for White House Custom Color. They're located up in Eagan, Minnesota, and I actually work remotely. I'm down in what's called Junction, Texas. So just a little town down here. Just absolutely love it. I've been in industry as far as technology for the last, 20 years. So prior to this, I had my own company, ended up doing that for a good 12 years, and ended up coming out of that by selling that. And then prior to that, I worked for a company called NativeX. So we did ads for mobile games, and that one ended up getting sold also. So very that was wonderful there. And prior to even before all that, I was with the United States Marine Corps for 8 years, and just had a great time there. So it was fun. A lot of folks are curious, like, how do you transfer from like the Marines into technology? And it's really just, I love games. So it's just, I was a big gamer, a lot of folks, and figured out like, well, I can hack this game. Like, there's got to be more to it than just that. So that was kind of my transition and into the computer science, and eventually on to like a data science certificate. With regards to the book, um, it was really built around probably a personal approach. And when I say that, as VP, it's just a lot of that is meetings, unfortunately. But I still like the code at the end of the day. And so about, a year ago, I wanted to implement our API. And to do that, I need a lot of time. And what I found is I got about 30 minutes every single day, and so I need 6 hours. So it's like, well, how do I get 6 hours out of 30 minutes? And I was like, well, AI could probably help. And so probably for the last 1,200 hours of working through AI, I ended up coming up with a methodology that was able to get me 6, 12, 24 hours in 30 to 45 minutes. And so then I ended up taking that methodology and applying it to my company. And then based off of that, a best friend said, you should share this with people. Like, this is really good. And he goes, it works, because he was one of the biggest skeptics at the time. I was like, all right, I've never written a book before, but I'll give it a go. So about 2 months ago, I started on the path, ended up coming with the book based off of that lens.
Yeah, thanks very much for sharing that really great story. It's interesting. So many Leanpub books are written by who are like, you should share this with somebody, or I should share this with somebody, what I've learned. And it's really interesting. I mean, in particular, the point you make about how things are speeding up in terms of development. This is something we're seeing more in my interviews with launch videos and podcasts and stuff like that. But, there are people who are like kind of, you know, uh, really on the ground doing work in software in software engineering and other fields are like, whoa, like, this things are changing fast, but we have to adapt new methods to really succeed and to compete with these new kind of things that are available to us. They're not just tools, they're also methods. And the methods part is where the engineering comes in. And that's why we so many things people with engineering mindsets are like now applying them to the use of AI. And that's what your book is about. And you introduced something called the PIT, or plan, implement, test methodology. And so I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that. I mean, I know you explained very, very well that, like, one of the things you realize right away about artificial intelligence, like when we're talking about ChatGPT and stuff like that, that it's not deterministic. You can't program it currently like you can a computer, and this brings its own problems. But you found a solution to this, and it's the PIT methodology. So can you talk? What's the plan? What's the implement, and what's the test parts of this?
Yes, sir. So, I mean, if you look across right now, you're going to see a lot of naysayers, is what I found. And then there's Stanford articles that come out that say, "Oh my gosh, it's not as fast as everybody think it is," and I'm here to say it could be, and it is, for those that actually understand how to leverage the methodology. Because the problem, just like you said, Len, is if I ask ChatGPT like a question, I could get 3 different answers or 5 different answers every time I ask that. And from a software engineering standpoint, that's not what you want. If I tell my bank through an LLM and I would like, hey, you know what? I need to send Lynn a check. I owe him $5. I say, send Lynn a check for $5 and it inadvertently sends you $500. You're probably pretty happy. On my side, though, I'm like, what in the dickens happened there? Why I said $5? And so from that standpoint, it's like I need it to be deterministic. I need it to be the same thing every single time. And that's not an LLM. That's not AI. And so from that standpoint, that's where really the plan, implement, test came from is it's the first step is context. And that was the key thing that I learned is you've got to provide a lot of context to these AI systems. And so what I found working with individuals, even in my own company, is they would just load up, let's say within engineering, you have repos. So you have GitHub and things like that. And it just holds your code. And it's just a spot where you can put a bucket of code and they would just load up just this one. Well, it might be necessary to load up this other one and this other one. They might need two more code bases that would be really useful, but they wouldn't give them those. So the first step is really loading up the context into your workspace. So it's like you've got all the ones that matter. Because these are the same code bases that you would look at as an engineer or an architect when you're trying to research and actually create a plan individually. So it's no different than that, really. The next step is then like you say, hey, from a research standpoint, go through the code bases with this context of like, this is the thing that I'm trying to build. And I will guide it and actually drag files in and everything else to the chat window and say, here's the relevant API calls that we need. Let's say you're building a front end piece. Here's the relevant API pieces. Hey, you need to watch out for security. So take a look at this piece here. And from a front end standpoint, we want it to go here. And what's even better is if you can give it an example. Like here's a pattern I want you to follow right here. And then you're like, do the research around that. And that'll reach and create me a doc. And it'll create a research document. I usually just use Markdown, have it place it there. And then basically I go through that, go through it. And the reason I do that is it gives me a historical document that I can use later on, but then I can just validate like, oh, you got this wrong. Go back and fix this. So then now you've got a document because what happens is you're going to lose your context window eventually because it's going to have to collapse the context down. And now it's going to potentially hallucinate based off of it doesn't have that information anymore. So it's like you created a document so it can go back to it to use it from research. And then what I do is I actually got a bunch of custom commands built out now, and it's like, all right, now let's create a plan based off of that research document. So it's going to take that research document, create the plan, and I want you to create it in phased approaches. So I want phase 0 through phase 100 because I want to implement a little bit at a time. And typically, I'm a huge fan of like test-driven development. So it's like I want you also to include tests. So after each phase, we've got the tests. And so then once it actually builds out the plan, again, now I can go through, read the entire plan, like, tweak this, or I don't like this section, or I need you to change this. And here's the naming standards you should have used because I forgot to give you those in the context in the initial part. Use those. Go back through and yep, like, yep, plan solid. And then now you get the fun part. This is where I love it. Like, all right, let's go ahead and implement phase 0 of the plan. And you just set back. And that's when I grab my coffee or check my Twitter feed because it just rips through like that. And it just rips through and codes it all for you. And I usually set it into agent mode, or I call it yellow or you only live once mode, where it just runs through it and does it all. And then once that's done, it stops. So, and usually there are 5 to 10 minute segments is what I'm shooting for. Small chunks. I go back, I review the code. I can then actually look at my Git history because now I can see the exact files that have changed. I'm like, yeah, this looks good. This is exactly what I wanted. Here's the test. And since it's actually wrote the test, I can actually validate the test pass. I make sure it didn't hallucinate on the test. Sometimes when you do mocking, it can try to force it to update or chain pass. So I go back and validate. This all looks great. So then up right there, I'll go ahead and check that into my Git repo. And then I just keep going down my phases. Next one, next one, next one. Once that's done, I'll typically have a go ahead and do a validate the plan. So it rips through the code, validates everything that's done exactly to plan. Again, we're solid. The last step, I call the test piece, is really about the human testing side of things. I'm still a firm believer in actually doing testing and not just leaving it up to it. So, and the thing is though, I'll have it generate, let's say it's a new API, I'll actually have it generate my Postman scripts for me. Because it's like, why do it? It can do that faster than I can. So I'll have it generate Postman scripts, go through, make sure those are okay. And then I go through and actually test it out and make sure we've hit everything that we wanted from a plan standpoint. After that, it's create your PR and get it submitted. And I even have it create PR. So it's from a coding standpoint, I barely code anymore is the crazy part. It's more setting back and really watching it go. And across the industry, you're going to see folks calling this spec-driven design now or context engineering. So they're starting to come out with names across the board that are very similar from this standpoint. And it's really about following this process. Because one of the things I have noticed is like you'll see a lot of times when on X and things like that, there's like, "Oh my gosh, it just generated Pong," or it just generated, some game for me in 45 minutes. Greenfield is easy. It's really easy, but when you got a 200,000 line monolith that you're trying to figure out that has been around for the last 8 years, that's a different story. I mean, you have no idea where the gnarly points are.
Yeah, thanks very much for sharing that really great and very practical explanation of how it came about and the motivation for it, the context in which you developed the methodology, and then how it's actually used. So that's really great putting that all together. One thing I really like about your description of this methodology is the plan part at the beginning. That reminded me of a line I wrote down here from your book where you write, AI has evolved beyond being merely a competitive advantage. It's become as fundamental to software development as the calculator was to mathematics. Once the calculator arrived, doing complex math by hand wasn't a sign of mastery. It was a sign of falling behind. The same is now true of AI for software development, end quote. And I mean, you're not the first person to use a calculator analogy when a new, technology comes around. But the thing that's really great about it is that, like, you know, math is associated with something most of us think is very hard. And the calculator took away what was like for the human brain hard, but easy for the calculator. But mathematicians didn't go away
No.
at all. They just stopped having to do the things that the brain would take a really long, to divide 1,200,000, of course we have to work through all that, and that's just because the way our brains work, or most of our brains work. Um, another analogy, that the one that was sort of dear to me, I think it was Benedict Evans who did this one, was like, the spreadsheet didn't shorten investment banking hours. So the introduction, and so like what's happening, and like what I'm hearing from authors like you and people in positions like yours around the world, is that like the people who understand what the goal is and know how to devise a way to get there are the ones who have been very, like, now have this new capacity. And as you say, it's going to change the way you do things. For example, if you're computing nowadays, you don't have a team of people who go make punch cards, and then, for example, you don't have that anymore. So those, you talk about the controversy about, like, job loss and stuff like that, those jobs are going to go away. But, computing is taking over the world. There's way more, there's no more punch card people, but there's way more people working in computing now than there ever has been. So, this idea of like actually understanding, as you read, I think about, like the connection between the business side of things and the engineering side of things and the technical side of things and the deployment side of things. The more you understand the system, the better you'll be able to use this. But then again, just to stop going on for too long, but like the idea that planning it out is actually what's required. Don't just, and we've all had this experience, if you just sit down with AI, you're going to waste a lot of time.
Oh,
But if you just sit down, but if you have a plan after having used it for a while, of course, and seen what some of the problems are, you have a plan, then you can start doing things like time boxing your effort, time boxing it, things like that. So, well, Cliff, the book is Stop Implementing AI, the No BS Playbook for AI That Works. Anyone who's just watched this video knows how the sort of combination of practice and theory that you'll find in the book. I recommend it to anybody who's like working, even if you don't have to be a programmer. If you've got programmers in your company, this is a book you should read to understand where things are actually going right now. So thank you very much, Cliff, for being on this Leanpub launch video.
I greatly appreciate it, Lynn, and thank you so much. It's been great.